Wagon Train Massacre. Fanny Kelly's capture by Sioux warriors. Wyoming, 1864. Two of the most savage-looking of the party rushed up into my wagon, with tomahawks drawn in their right hands. With their left hands, they seized me and pulled me violently to the ground. Fanny Kelly's wagon train had just been ambushed by 250 Sioux warriors, armed with rifles, bows, and war clubs. Subscribe to Native Legends and History Stories for America's most harrowing survival tales. What terrible series of misunderstandings led to this deadly encounter that would forever change how settlers viewed their journey west? In 1864, the Kelly party's 5 wagons rolled across Wyoming, carving a path through the prairie. Oxen, bound by worn harnesses, trudged forward, kicking up dust. Many other wagon trains moved along the Oregon Trail that season, all driven by the same ambition. Just over those hills lies the gateway to paradise, Franklin Kelly announced, pointing toward the distant horizon, where purple mountains rose against cloudless blue skies. His wife, Annie, nodded, calloused hands gripping the wagon seat. As they navigated another rocky stretch, their wagon led the small caravan of 5. The Wakefields followed close behind, then the Laramie family, and finally, the Taylors and Mr. Sharp bringing up the rear. The small band had chosen to travel separately from the larger emigrant trains. Smaller groups moved faster, and the roads seemed safe enough. According to every authority they'd encountered, 3 more weeks to Idaho if we keep this pace. Mr. Wakefield called from the second wagon. Gold the size of hen's eggs just waiting to be picked up. At Fort Laramie, they'd pause to replenish supplies and gather information. The military officers had been dismissive of any concerns about hostile Indians. Those stories are greatly exaggerated. The fort commander had chuckled, stamping their travel papers. The Sioux signed treaties last year. They're peacefully hunting buffalo, 50 miles north of here. He tapped the map with military precision. Follow this route, and you'll reach Idaho without seeing anything more dangerous than prairie dogs. Similar assurances at Horseshoe Creek's telegraph station. Just days earlier, the station operator had looked up from his instruments, annoyed at the interruption. "Ma'am, if I telegraphed east every time someone spotted a hunting party, we'd crash the entire system," he told Fanny with a patronizing smile. "The Indians around here are more interested in trading than fighting." Being quiet for months, Franklin Kelly had studied the man's face. "You'd tell us if there was real danger on." "My honor, sir. The road ahead is clear all the way to South Pass." These professional assessments convinced the party to proceed without fear. They even declined to join a larger caravan for the sake of making better time. 20 miles a day instead of 12. That meant reaching the goldfields before the first snow that particular evening, July 12. They'd made camp near clear spring water. The setting sun cast long shadows across their circle of wagons as Mary Wakefield skipped between them, her golden curls bouncing with each step. At 7 years old, she'd somehow maintained her spirit through the grueling journey. "Miss Fanny, look what I found." The child held up a prairie flower, its purple petals still dewy fresh. "It's beautiful," Mary Fanny replied, tucking it behind the girl's ear, "like a little piece of heaven." Mr. Wakefield sat on his wagon, tongue-tuning a well-traveled fiddle. The campfire crackled as coffee boiled in a blackened pot, and the scent of beans and bacon filled the air. This routine had become comfortingly familiar over the 8 weeks since leaving Kansas. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wakefield announced with theatrical flourish, raising his bow, "I present the Idaho Anthem." His fiddle struck up a lively tune as his rich tenor voice carried across the quiet prairie. "Ho for Idaho, where fortune's river flows, where gold lies thick upon the ground, and every man of fortune's found." Little Mary's sweet high voice joined the chorus. The child twirled beside the fire, her homespun dress billowing around skinny legs. Even the oxen seemed to lift their heads at the music. "Sing with us, Mr. Taylor." Mary called, but the taciturn man just smiled and continued cleaning his rifle, a ritual he performed each evening. With methodical precision, Franklin Kelly leaned against his wagon wheel, watching his wife set out 10 plates for supper. The scene felt perfect, 5 families united in purpose, sharing a final meal before reaching their destination. The evening light bathed everything in a golden glow that seemed to promise the future they all sought. "I believe we'll be there by month's end," Kelly said, accepting a steaming cup from Fanny, "and not a bit of trouble the whole way." Mrs. Laramie nodded from where she sat, mending a shirt. "The Lord has blessed our journey." None of them noticed the sudden silence of the birds in the cottonwoods, or how the prairie dogs had disappeared into their burrows. The music and laughter masked any warning signs. As the sun slipped below the horizon, "Another day's journey tomorrow," Wakefield announced, setting down his fiddle, "and each mile brings us closer to our fortune." The travelers settled into their evening routine, unaware that just beyond the ridge, painted warriors were applying war colors to their faces and horses. Scouts had been tracking the small wagon train for 2 days, counting its members, assessing its defenses. Their reports had traveled back to the main camp, where a war council determined these settlers were perfect targets, isolated, poorly armed, and completely unaware. As darkness fell across the prairie, Fanny Kelly wrote in her journal, "By candlelight, the scenery around us filled our hearts with joy. Today we travel peacefully onward, with visions bright as the western sky. Our small party moves quickly toward the promised land." She couldn't know these would be the last peaceful words she would write. For many months by this time tomorrow, half their party would lie dead upon the blood-stained grass, and she would be a captive, facing an unimaginable ordeal. The morning sun had barely crested the eastern bluffs when Franklin Kelly gave the order to move out. The 5 wagons formed a single file, wheels cutting fresh tracks across the Wyoming grass. No one in the party sensed the watching eyes, tracking their movement from the distant ridgeline. At midday, they stopped to rest the oxen near a shallow creek. The animals drank deeply, while Mary Wakefield collected wildflowers along the bank. The July heat shimmered across the plains, distorting the distant hills into wavy mirages. "Water barrels need filling," Franklin called, wiping sweat from his brow. "We may not find another creek before nightfall." The party had just finished their task when the landscape erupted in chaos. Without warning, the bluffs ahead swarmed with mounted warriors, approximately 250 Sioux, their bodies streaked with war paint, in vermilion and black. They crested the ridge like a wave, brandishing rifles and bows, their war cries splitting the air. A thunderous volley of gunfire erupted as they fired into the sky. "My God," whispered Franklin Kelly, the blood draining from his face. Fanny Kelly clutched little Mary to her side as the child began to scream. "Quiet, darling," she whispered, though her own heart hammered against her ribs. "It's happening so fast," Mrs. Laramie gasped, stumbling backward toward her wagon. Franklin Kelly shouted over the chaos, "Form the wagons, circle up." The men scrambled to position their vehicles, but the open terrain offered little defensive advantage. The Sioux warriors encircled them in seconds, whooping and shouting as they tightened their noose. Wakefield raised his rifle, his knuckles white against the wooden stock. "No, Fanny." Kelly grabbed his arm. "There are too many. They'll slaughter us all." She turned to her husband, clutching his sleeve. "Franklin, don't fire, for God's sake. Try to talk to them, Franklin." Kelly hesitated, measuring the overwhelming odds. 250 painted warriors against 5 civilian men with hunting rifles. The mathematics of survival were brutally clear. "She's right," he finally said, lowering his weapon. "We can't fight our way out of this." As the designated leader of their small train, Franklin Kelly stepped forward, raising his empty hands toward the advancing chief. The Sioux leader, an imposing figure, adorned with eagle feathers and beaded ornaments, spurred his pony forward, his face painted with red and black stripes, remained impassive as he approached. "How?" the chief called out, raising his hand, in what appeared to be a peaceful greeting. "I am Ottawa," he announced in broken English, thumping his chest, "war chief of Oglala Sioux." He grinned, revealing teeth stained with tobacco. "Good Indian me, keep. Good Indian hunt buffalo and deer." Ottawa dismounted and extended his hand to Franklin Kelly. The settlers exchanged uncertain glances as the chief's band followed his example, crowding around the wagons and insisting on shaking everyone's hand repeatedly. "What do you want, Franklin?" asked his voice, steady despite his fear. Ottawa's eyes flicked toward Kelly's fine bay horse. "Trade," he said, pointing my horse for your horse. Franklin's jaw tightened. The bay was his prized possession, a racing horse he'd brought all the way from Missouri. But with 250 armed warriors surrounding them, refusing wasn't an option. "Fine," he said tersely. Handing over the reins, Ottawa smiled broadly, revealing yellow teeth, "Now food." "Need flour, Mrs. Wakefield?" Hurriedly produced a sack of precious flour. To her horror, the warriors immediately emptied it onto the ground, keeping only the cloth sack. "What are they doing?" she whispered to Fanny. "That was almost the last of our supplies. Just let them take what they want," Fanny replied softly. "We must keep them calm until help comes." For nearly an hour, the charade of friendliness continued. The warriors rifled through their possessions, taking clothing despite the summer heat cold. Soon, one warrior explained unconvincingly, as he seized a woolen jacket. Fanny Kelly, attempting to maintain some semblance of normality, pointed to her worn-out shoes. "If you take our things, I need moccasins." A young warrior, surprisingly, produced a beautifully beaded pair, handing them to her with an inscrutable expression. Throughout this tense exchange, little Mary clung to Fanny's skirts, her eyes wide with fear. Mrs. Laramie sat rigid on her wagon seat, clutching her Bible so tightly. Her knuckles turned white. Franklin Kelly kept scanning the horizon, hoping desperately for the dust cloud that would signal approaching travelers. They had passed another wagon earlier that morning. Perhaps they would catch up soon. Ottawa suddenly gestured to the trail ahead. "You go now, we no trouble you." The settlers exchanged skeptical glances, but prepared to continue their journey. As they resumed their trek, warriors flanked them on both sides, herding them like cattle. After approximately a mile, Franklin Kelly called for a halt. Ahead lay a narrow ravine flanked by steep rocky walls. A perfect place for an ambush. "We can't go that way," he announced firmly. Ottawa's face darkened. "You go," he insisted, gesturing again toward the ravine. "No," Franklin replied. "Standing his ground, we'll make camp here instead." For a moment, tension crackled between them. Then, unexpectedly, Ottawa's demeanor shifted. "Good, we eat together. Then we sleep on hills," he declared, waving toward the surrounding bluffs. Relief washed over the settlers. Perhaps they had misread the situation. Maybe these were just hungry hunters seeking provisions. "We'll prepare a meal," Fanny offered, already reaching for her cooking implements. Mr. Taylor began gathering firewood, while Mr. Wakefield retrieved cooking pots from his wagon. The atmosphere relaxed slightly as the settlers busied themselves with familiar tasks. Ottawa's warriors dismounted, lounging in small groups, watching the preparations with predatory eyes. Mrs. Larimore leaned close to Fanny as they arranged cooking supplies. "I don't trust them," she whispered, "the way they're watching us." Before Fanny could respond, the air exploded with gunfire. The peaceful facade shattered as warriors leveled their weapons and fired in unison. Through the cloud of gunsmoke, Fanny saw Mr. Laramie running desperately toward the creek. Mr. Wakefield stumbled forward a few steps, then collapsed, blood blossoming across his chest. His fiddle still in the wagon. Would never play hoe for Idaho again. Mr. Taylor fell backward, a rifle ball having torn through his forehead. His dying gaze fixed on Fanny in those final seconds, as if imploring her to remember what happened here. Mr. Sharp dropped just feet away, instantly killed by multiple arrows. Frank, their loyal servant, collapsed at Fanny's feet, his body bristling with arrows, like a terrible pincushion. The ground turned dark with spreading blood,